My name is Lalita. I'm 75 years old. And if there is one thing I have learned after all these years, after love and loss, after building and breaking, after believing and doubting, it is this: God never takes something without preparing something better. But you rarely see it while it's happening. You only understand it later. I want to speak to you softly today, not as a preacher, not as someone who claims to know everything, but as an old woman who has cried on kitchen floors, who has stared at empty bank accounts, who has watched doors close and thought, this is the end, and who later realized it was never the end. It was preparation. Let me tell you about the hardest year of my life. I was 52 years old when my husband passed unexpectedly. One moment, we were planning a small renovation. The next, I was standing in a hospital hallway with a silence so loud it felt like it would split me in half. Within months, my financial stability disappeared. His income was gone. Our plans dissolved. The future I thought I knew evaporated. I prayed, not politely. I begged. I cried. I asked God, why would you take this from me? There was no immediate answer. There was no sign in the sky. There was only emptiness. And here is something I need you to understand deeply. The silence of God does not mean the absence of God. It often means construction. While I was grieving what was lost, something else was being assembled behind the scenes, but I couldn't see it yet. You rarely can. We want clarity immediately. We want reassurance immediately. We want the blueprint before we are asked to walk. But faith doesn't work like that. Faith is walking while the blueprint is still being drawn. I spent that year thinking everything had collapsed. But what I did not know was that the collapse was clearing ground. You cannot build something new on a foundation that is no longer strong. And sometimes what feels like destruction is actually demolition before reconstruction. About 18 months later, something unexpected happened. A woman I barely knew approached me with a small business idea. It was nothing impressive, nothing dramatic, but it was steady. It grew slowly. It connected me with people I would never have met otherwise. And through that small beginning, my financial life didn't just recover, it transformed. I became more independent than I had ever been, stronger, more aligned with who I truly was. And years later, when I looked back at that hospital hallway, I realized something that made me weep. God had not taken my stability. He had taken my dependency. He was preparing something bigger than what I imagined was safe. Let me tell you something gently. What you think is your best plan is often limited by your current imagination. God's plan is not limited by your imagination. You see a closed door and assume loss. God sees a redirect. You see delay and assume rejection. God sees timing. You see emptiness and assume abandonment. God sees preparation. I know how frustrating that sounds when you are in the middle of the waiting. Waiting is the hardest part, because waiting feels like nothing is happening. But I promise you something. Waiting is rarely idle. It is incubation. Seeds grow underground long before they break the surface. And if you dig them up every day to check, you interrupt the process. There were months after my husband died when I felt nothing but fear. Fear about money, fear about loneliness, fear about survival. And in that fear, I kept trying to force solutions. I tried to rush outcomes. I tried to create stability artificially. And every time I forced, something broke. Until one night, exhausted beyond pride, I whispered something different. I said, "If you are preparing something better, I will trust the silence." That was the turning point. Not because circumstances changed immediately, but because I did. When you shift from panic to trust, your posture changes, your decisions change, your energy changes, and your ability to recognize opportunity changes. God's preparation often arrives disguised as inconvenience, as detour, as discomfort, and only later do you see it was alignment. Let me ask you something honestly. What has been removed from your life recently? A job? A relationship? A financial opportunity? A plan you were certain about? Instead of asking, "Why was this taken?" try asking, "What is this making room for?" That question changes your entire frequency. Because when you believe something better is being prepared, you stop clinging to what is leaving. And clinging blocks what is coming. I want to be clear about something important. Trusting that something better is coming does not mean ignoring pain. It does not mean pretending you're fine. I cried deeply during those years. I grieved. I felt angry at times. But underneath all of it, slowly I allowed one quiet belief to grow. This is not random. That belief stabilized me more than any financial strategy ever could. Because when you believe your life is guided, even when it's uncomfortable, you move differently. You don't collapse at every setback. You don't interpret every delay as doom. You begin to see patterns, connections, hidden arrangements. I have lived long enough to see too many accidents align perfectly later. Too many losses reveal themselves as protection. Too many delays turn out to be divine timing. Now, I want you to breathe with me for a moment, right now. Take a slow breath and ask yourself gently, what if this isn't punishment? What if this is positioning? What if God is not removing something from you, but relocating you? The mind wants immediate evidence, but faith works in layers. Layer 1 is trust without proof. Layer 2 is small signs. Layer 3 is clarity in hindsight. You may be in layer 1 right now, and that is okay. I am 75 years old, and I can tell you this with absolute certainty. Every single season of my life that felt like an ending was actually preparation. Every single time I thought, this is worse than I imagined, something better than I imagined eventually appeared. Not always in the form I expected, but always better for who I became. And sometimes the better is not just money. It is strength, independence, wisdom, peace. Because wealth without inner expansion is fragile. But when God prepares something better, He prepares you too. That's the part we often overlook. You are being strengthened for what is coming. If you feel shaken right now, maybe you are being expanded. If you feel uncomfortable, maybe you are being stretched. If something ended abruptly, maybe it was too small for your next season. I want to leave you with something to carry tonight. Before you sleep, instead of asking, when will this get better? Try saying, I trust what I cannot yet see. And mean it, even if your voice shakes. And in the comments, if you are ready, write this. Something better is being prepared. Not as blind hope, as alignment. Because even when you cannot see it, even when you are tired, even when you are confused, God is not finished with your story, not even close. Stay steady, stay open. The chapter you're in right now is not the final one, and what is coming may be far greater than anything you would have dared to plan for yourself.